The Dakota Territory, 1878. Winter had come early and harsh, blanketing the endless prairie in white silence. Sarah Brennan stood at the window of the small farmhouse, her breath fogging the cold glass as she watched the pre-dawn darkness begin to fade. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the worn carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. 3 dresses, a photograph of her mother, and the last $5 to her name. She had to leave now, before he woke up. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she moved toward the door, and Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She held her breath, listening for any sound from the room where Thomas Brennan slept. Her husband of 6 weeks, a man she barely knew, a man who had answered her letter when she'd written to the matrimonial agency in desperation after her father died and left her with nothing but debts. Thomas was nothing like what she'd expected. The advertisement had been simple. Widowed farmer seeks wife, must be of good character and willing to work, children welcomed. She'd imagined someone old, perhaps unkind, someone who needed a housekeeper more than a wife. But Thomas Brennan was neither old nor unkind. He was 32, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of a summer storm. He was quiet, almost painfully so, speaking only when necessary. And he was gentle with her in a way that made her chest ache with something she didn't dare name. That was precisely why she had to leave. Sarah couldn't bear the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her, couldn't stand the careful way he moved around her, as if afraid she might shatter. She'd seen the way his jaw clenched when she flinched at sudden movements, the way his hands balled into fists when she apologized for mistakes she hadn't made. He knew. Somehow, he knew about the bruises that had finally faded from her arms, about the way her first engagement had ended when she discovered what kind of man Robert Fairmont really was. Thomas deserved better than a broken woman who jumped at shadows, better than someone who couldn't sleep through the night without nightmares, better than a wife who couldn't even bring herself to meet his eyes across the dinner table. The marriage had been arranged with one understanding. She would keep his house, and he would provide for her. Nothing more had been promised, nothing more expected. They'd married in the small church in Millbrook, with the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Thomas had placed a simple gold band on her finger and spoken his vows in that low, gravelly voice that seemed to rumble through her bones. She'd moved into his farmhouse that same day. He'd given her the bedroom while he took the small room that had once belonged to his son, his 7-year-old son James, who died of fever 2 winters ago, along with Thomas's first wife, Mary. Sarah had seen the photograph on the mantel. Mary had been beautiful, with dark hair and a gentle smile, the kind of woman who belonged here, who knew how to be a farmer's wife, how to make a house into a home. Sarah was none of those things. She was a merchant's daughter from Philadelphia who'd never churned butter or fed chickens or cooked over a wood stove. She'd burned the first 3 meals she'd tried to make, and Thomas had eaten every bite without complaint, even thanking her afterward. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, she'd gotten better at the cooking, learned to manage the chickens, and tend the small vegetable garden that somehow survived despite the early frost. Thomas worked from dawn until long after dark, bringing in the last of the harvest, repairing fences, preparing for the brutal winter that was already settling over the territory. He'd catch her watching him sometimes, and their eyes would meet across the yard. He'd nod just slightly, and something warm would unfurl in her chest before she remembered herself and looked away. Last night had been different. Last night, a blizzard had struck without warning, howling winds driving snow against the windows until the world disappeared into white chaos. The temperature had dropped so fast that ice formed on the inside of the glass. Thomas had spent hours checking the barn, making sure the animals were secure, bringing in extra firewood. When he'd finally come inside, his coat had been frozen stiff, his face red from the cold. Sarah had helped him out of his coat, her hands shaking as she'd realized how cold he was. Without thinking, she'd pressed her palms against his chest, trying to warm him. He'd gone completely still. She'd looked up and found him staring down at her with an expression she couldn't read. His hand had lifted slowly, as if he were afraid of startling a wild bird, and his fingers had brushed against her cheek. "You're crying," he'd whispered, his voice rough. She hadn't even realized. But there had been tears on her face, hot against her frozen skin. "I'm sorry," she'd said automatically, stepping back. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" Sarah, just her name. But something in the way he'd said it had made her stop. "You don't have to apologize. Not to me, not ever." His hand had still been raised, hovering between them, and she'd seen it trembling. Not from the cold, from restraint, from the visible effort it took him not to reach for her, not to pull her close. That was when she'd known she had to leave, because she wanted him to, wanted to feel those strong arms around her, wanted to bury her face against his chest and let herself believe that she could be safe, that she could be wanted. But she'd learned that wanting led to pain, that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Robert had taught her that lesson well. So now, in the grey light before dawn, Sarah turned the doorknob as quietly as she could. The hinges creaked, and she winced, but there was no sound from Thomas's room. The cold hit her like a physical blow as she stepped outside. The blizzard had passed, but the world was buried in snow that came up past her knees. The barn was barely visible through the lingering darkness. She had no real plan. The nearest town was Millbrook, 7 miles away. She'd walk if she had to. Someone there would take pity on her, let her work for passage back east, back to Philadelphia, where at least she understood the rules, even if she had no place there anymore. Sarah took 3 steps into the snow before she heard the voice behind her. "You're not going anywhere." She spun around, her bag falling from numb fingers. Thomas stood in the doorway, barefoot despite the cold, wearing only his wool trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. His dark hair was disheveled from sleep, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I was just—" A lie died on her lips as he stepped down into the snow, not even seeming to notice the cold as he walked toward her. "You were leaving." It wasn't a question. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking there. In the middle of winter, with a storm barely past and another likely coming, with $5 and no coat thick enough for this cold. "How did you—" "I know everything you own, Sarah. I know you checked the pantry yesterday and counted the supplies. I know you've been sleeping even less than usual, and I know you didn't eat dinner last night." He stopped an arm's length away from her, close enough that she could see the pain in his eyes. "I know because I watch you, because I can't stop watching you, wondering what I did wrong, wondering why you look at me like you're waiting for me to hurt you." "I don't." But the protest was weak, and they both knew it. "I've given you space, given you time, tried to show you that I'm not, that I would never." His hands clenched at his sides. "But you're still running. So either you tell me what I did, or you tell me what someone else did that made you think you can't stay here. That made you think walking into a Dakota winter is better than staying with me." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "You're too kind, you're too patient and too gentle, and you look at me like I'm something precious, and I can't bear it because I don't deserve it. And eventually you'll realize that," and then she broke off, horrified at herself. But Thomas was staring at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Too kind," he repeated slowly. "You're leaving because I'm too kind to you. You don't understand. I'm not a good wife. I can barely cook. I don't know how to do half the things Mary probably knew. I wake up screaming from nightmares. I flinch when you move too fast. Stop." The word was quiet but firm. Thomas took another step closer. "I don't want Mary. I buried Mary 2 years ago, and I loved her, and I'll always love her, but she's gone. And when I placed that advertisement, I wasn't looking for someone to replace her." "Then what were you looking for?" Sarah whispered. "Someone who needed a second chance as much as I did." His voice was rough with emotion. "Someone who'd been hurt and was trying to survive. Someone who might understand what it's like to wake up every morning and have to remember how to keep living." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. "I'm so broken, Thomas. I don't know if I can be fixed. I don't want to fix you." He took one more step, and now they were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, despite the freezing air. "I just want to stand beside you while you heal, if you'll let me." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Why would you want that?" Something shifted in his expression, becoming more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Because when I see you fighting to get through each day, when I watch you refuse to give up, even though I can see how tired you are, when you smile at the chickens or hum while you're cooking or read the almanac by lamplight," his voice broke slightly, "you make this house feel less empty. You make me remember what it's like to want to come home. And maybe I'm selfish. Maybe I'm asking too much. But I'm not ready to let that go. I'm not ready to let you go." Thomas, I know you can't trust me yet. I know you might never be able to. But Sarah, you can't walk 7 miles in this snow. You'll die before you make it halfway to town. His hand finally lifted, moving slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted. His fingertips brushed against her jaw, tilting her face up toward his. Please, come back inside. If you still want to leave in the spring, when the weather's better, I'll take you to town myself. I'll buy you a ticket anywhere you want to go. But don't leave like this. Don't leave me wondering if you froze to death because I couldn't find the right words to make you stay. His thumb traced across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't known was falling. The touch was so gentle it made her ache. This man, this strong, quiet man who'd lost everything and was still somehow able to be gentle, still able to ask instead of demand, still able to touch her like she was something fragile and worth protecting. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words barely audible. Of me? Of wanting to stay? Of letting myself believe that this could work? Of caring about you? And then her voice broke. Of it ending the way everything else has ended. Thomas's other hand came up, cupping her face between his palms. His hands were rough from work, but warm. So warm. And she found herself leaning into the touch without meaning to. I can't promise you forever, he said quietly. Life is too hard out here for promises like that. But I can promise you today. I can promise that right now, in this moment, you have a place here, a home. And I can promise that I will never, ever raise my hand to you in anger. That I will never make you apologize for being human. That I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Even if who I am is broken? Even then. His forehead lowered until it rested against hers. Especially then. Because Sarah, I'm broken too. We all are out here. The territory breaks everyone eventually. But maybe his breath was warm against her frozen skin. Maybe two broken people can hold each other up better than one whole person ever could. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be a wife, a real wife. Then we'll figure it out together. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone again. One day at a time, one moment at a time, however long it takes. What if I can't? What if I'm never able to? She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the fear that she'd never be able to give him what a husband deserved from a wife. But Thomas seemed to understand anyway. I told you when we married that I wasn't expecting anything from you beyond keeping the house. I meant it. If all we ever have is companionship, if all you ever want is separate rooms and polite conversation, that's enough. You're enough, Sarah, just as you are. A sob broke free from her chest, and before she knew what she was doing, she'd pressed her face against his shirt, her frozen fingers clutching at the fabric. Thomas's arms came around her immediately, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other wrapped around her waist, holding her against him. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. I've got you, and I'm not letting go. They stood like that for a long moment, Sarah crying into his chest, while Thomas held her and whispered reassurances she couldn't quite make out. Eventually, she became aware that they were both shaking, her from emotion, him from the cold. His feet had to be frozen by now. You're going to lose your toes, she managed, pulling back just enough to look up at him, standing out here in the snow with no boots. He smiled, and it transformed his face. She'd never seen him really smile before. Worth it, he said simply. Thomas Brennan, you're a fool, probably. He bent down and retrieved her carpet bag from the snow. But I'm a fool who's going to get you back inside before we both freeze solid. Before she could protest, he'd swept her up into his arms, bag and all. Sarah let out a surprised gasp, her arms automatically going around his neck. I can walk. Your skirts are soaked through and you're shivering. He was already carrying her toward the house, moving through the deep snow as if she weighed nothing at all. Humor me, she should argue, should insist on her independence. But his chest was warm against her side, and his arms were strong and steady, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt safe. Thomas carried her through the door and set her down gently near the stove, which was still radiating heat from the night's fire. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick quilt, which he wrapped around her shoulders. Stay here, he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. I need to check the animals and bring in more wood. When I get back, we're going to have breakfast and then we're going to talk. Really talk. About everything. About what happened before you came here. About what you need from me. About how we're going to make this work. Understand? Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thomas studied her for a long moment, as if making sure she wasn't going to bolt the moment he left. Then he did something that surprised her. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, so gentle it was barely more than a brush of his lips. "Welcome home, Sarah," he whispered. Then he was gone, pulling on his boots and coat and heading back out into the cold. Sarah stood wrapped in the quilt, touching her fingertips to her forehead, where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, she realized. This harsh, unforgiving land was beautiful, and maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see herself the same way Thomas seemed to see her. The morning passed in a blur. Thomas came back inside with an armload of firewood and snow dusting his dark hair. He built up the fire while Sarah changed into dry clothes, her fingers still clumsy with cold. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found him at the stove, expertly frying eggs and bacon. "You can cook," she said, surprised. He glanced over his shoulder at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Had to learn after Mary died. Couldn't let James starve." The mention of his son was casual, but Sarah saw the way his shoulders tensed slightly. She moved closer, watching him work. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "About James." Thomas was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, still focused on the pan, he began to speak. He was 7, small for his age, but scrappy, had his mother's eyes and her laugh. A slight smile touched Thomas's lips. He loved the horses. Used to sneak out to the barn before dawn to feed them apples. I'd pretend I didn't know, and he'd pretend he was being sneaky. "He sounds wonderful." He was. Thomas's voice roughened. The fever came on fast. One day he was fine, running around getting into trouble. The next, he couldn't get out of bed. Mary was nursing him, barely sleeping. Then she got sick too. He paused, his jaw working. They died within hours of each other. I wasn't able to. Sarah reached out before she could think better of it, placing her hand on his back. Thomas went still. "I buried them on the hill behind the house," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "where they could see the sunrise. James always loved watching the sun come up." "I'm so sorry, Thomas." He turned off the stove and turned to face her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "After they died, I didn't want to keep going, didn't see the point. But the animals still needed feeding, the crops still needed harvesting, and every morning I'd wake up and have to choose to keep living even though I didn't want to." "What made you keep choosing?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Stubbornness, maybe, or the thought that giving up would dishonor their memory." He reached up and covered her hand with his, still pressed against his back. "But I was just going through the motions, just surviving, until you got off that stage in town, looking scared and determined in equal measure, and I thought..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "Thought what?" "That maybe I wasn't the only one who was lost, that maybe I could help someone else find their way, even if I hadn't found mine yet." Sarah's throat tightened. "I thought you'd be disappointed when you saw me. The advertisement said you'd welcome children, and here I came, unable to even give you that." Thomas frowned. "Why would you think I can't have children?" The words came out in a rush, something she'd never said aloud before. "There was an accident when I was 17, a fall. The doctor said I'd never be able to conceive." She waited for the disappointment, the anger, the rejection. Instead, Thomas's thumb stroked across the back of her hand. "Did you think I'd send you away if I knew? Most men would. I'm not most men." He turned fully toward her now, both of his hands coming up to frame her face. "Sarah, I didn't place that advertisement because I wanted more children. I placed it because this house was too quiet, and I was too alone, and I thought maybe having someone here would make both of us less lonely. But you said children were welcome, because if you'd had a child from a previous marriage, I wouldn't have turned you away, not because I was expecting you to give me one." His expression was fierce now. "You're not broken because you can't have babies. You're not less valuable, or less worthy, or less of a woman. You're Sarah. That's all you need to be." The tears came then, hot and fast, and Thomas pulled her against his chest, letting her cry while he held her and murmured soothing words. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah found herself sitting in one of the kitchen chairs with Thomas kneeling in front of her, his large hands wrapped around her smaller ones. "Tell me about him," Thomas said quietly. "The man who hurt you." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to keep that shameful secret locked away. But Thomas's eyes were patient and kind, and she found the words spilling out. "His name was Robert Fairmont. He was a banker's son, wealthy and charming. My father was so proud when Robert started courting me, said I was making an advantageous match." She stared down at their joined hands. "I was 19. I thought I was in love. What happened? Little things at first. He'd criticize the way I dressed or laugh at something I said, tell me I was too sensitive when I got upset. Then the criticisms got harsher. He'd grab my arm hard enough to leave bruises, then apologize and say he didn't know his own strength. He'd back me into corners during arguments, use his size to intimidate me." Thomas's hands tightened around hers, but his voice stayed gentle. "Did he hit me?" "Once, across the face, when I said I didn't want to attend a party with him." Sarah touched her cheek unconsciously. "That's when I ended the engagement. My father was furious. Said I was throwing away my future over one mistake, that all men had tempers, that I needed to be more understanding." Your father was wrong. The simple statement, spoken with such conviction, made Sarah's eyes sting with fresh tears. "Robert spread rumors about me after I broke things off, said I was unstable, hysterical. No respectable man in Philadelphia would court me after that." She laughed bitterly. "Then my father died 6 months later, and I discovered he'd gambled away everything we had. I had no money, no prospects, no family, so I answered an advertisement for mail-order brides, thinking at least I'd have a roof over my head. Even if the man turned out to be cruel, at least I'd have food and shelter. And instead you got me," Thomas said. "Instead I got you," Sarah agreed. "A kind man who never raises his voice, who asks instead of demands, who looks at me like I'm worth something." She met his eyes. "It terrified me, Thomas, because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, kept waiting for you to show your true colors. And when you didn't, when you just kept being gentle and patient, I didn't know what to do with that. So you decided to leave. I thought it would be easier, less painful than waiting for you to realize I'm not worth the effort." Thomas released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Sarah Brennan, you listen to me. You are worth every effort, every moment, every ounce of patience I've got, and then some. You're strong and brave, and you're still fighting even though life has beaten you down. That's not broken. That's remarkable." "I wake up screaming," she whispered. "I have nightmares about him, about being trapped. Then I'll wake up with you. I'll sit with you until the nightmares fade, however long it takes. I flinch when people move too fast near me. Then I'll move slowly. I'll make sure you always see me coming. I don't know if I'll ever be able to—" She couldn't say the words, couldn't articulate the fear that she'd never be able to let him touch her the way a wife should let a husband touch her. But Thomas understood. "We'll figure it out together, or we won't, and that'll be fine too. Sarah, I'm not going to lie and say I don't want you. I do. I want to hold you and kiss you and—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "But what I want even more is for you to feel safe, for you to be happy. Everything else is secondary to that." "You mean that?" "With everything I am." He leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I know you can't trust that yet. I know it's going to take time, but I'm not going anywhere, Sarah, and I'm asking you not to go anywhere either. Stay. Give this a chance. Give us a chance." Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke and soap and something uniquely Thomas. In this moment, wrapped in his gentle presence, she could almost believe that everything he was saying was true, that she could be safe here, that she could be wanted. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll stay." She opened her eyes and found him staring at her with an expression of such naked relief that it made her chest ache. "I'll try, Thomas. I can't promise I won't be difficult, or that I won't have bad days, or that—" He kissed her. Not on the forehead this time, but on the lips, soft and tentative and achingly sweet. It lasted only a moment before he pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Was that all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first. Sarah surprised them both by leaning forward and kissing him back. Thomas made a sound low in his throat, one of his hands sliding into her hair while the other stayed gentle on her face. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't want to pull away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers again. "You're trembling," he murmured. "So are you. It's been a long time since I've kissed someone. Wasn't sure I remembered how." Sarah laughed. the sound surprising her. "You remember just fine." "Good." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the heat in his eyes made her stomach flip. "Because I'd like to do it again. Frequently. If you're amenable." "I might be amenable," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "Just might be?" She bit her lip, fighting a smile. "I'd need more evidence to make a definitive decision." Thomas's grin was slow and devastating. "I think that can be arranged." He kissed her again, taking his time, and Sarah let herself sink into it. Let herself believe just for a moment that this could be real, that she could have this. Safety and kindness, and a man who looked at her like she was precious. When Thomas finally pulled away, he pressed one more kiss to her forehead before standing up. "The eggs are probably cold," he said, gesturing to the abandoned pan. "I don't mind." "I do. My wife deserves a hot breakfast." He moved back to the stove, reheating the food. Sarah sat at the table and watched him work, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. They ate together, Thomas telling her stories about the farm and the neighbors in town. Sarah found herself laughing at his dry humor, the sound foreign to her own ears. When had she last laughed like this? After breakfast, Thomas insisted on checking her feet and hands for frostbite from her time in the snow. His touch was clinical but gentle as he examined her, murmuring with relief when he found no serious damage. "You were lucky," he said, wrapping her feet in warm blankets. "Another few minutes and it would have been bad." "I wasn't thinking clearly," Sarah admitted. "You were scared. People do foolish things when they're scared." He sat down beside her, pulling her feet into his lap and rubbing warmth back into them through the blankets. "But Sarah, if you ever feel like running again, I need you to talk to me first, even if it's 3 in the morning and I'm dead asleep. Wake me up. Tell me what's wrong. Give me a chance to fix it. Or at least understand it. What if I can't articulate what's wrong? What if I don't even know myself? Then tell me that. Tell me you're scared or overwhelmed or whatever it is you're feeling. I won't judge you. I won't be angry. I'll just be there. That's all I can offer, Sarah. Just my presence and my willingness to listen." She studied his face, the strong jaw, the serious eyes, the mouth that was more used to being set in a hard line than smiling. This man who'd lost everything, and was somehow still able to be tender, still able to offer pieces of himself to a broken stranger. "Why are you so good?" she asked softly. Thomas looked surprised by the question. "I'm not good, Sarah. I'm just a man trying to do right by the people in my care." "That's what makes you good." He shook his head, but didn't argue further. Instead, he continued his ministrations, rubbing warmth back into her feet until Sarah felt drowsy and content. The sun had fully risen now, streaming through the windows and painting everything in golden light. "Tell me something," Thomas said after a while. "Something you love, something that makes you happy." Sarah thought about it. "Books. I love to read. My mother had a collection of poetry, and I used to read it by candlelight when I couldn't sleep." "What happened to the books?" "Had to sell them to pay debts." The loss still stung, even after all these months. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Next time I go to town, I'll see about getting you some books. The general store has a small library section. Not much, but something." "Thomas, you don't have to." "I want to." He met her eyes. "I want to give you things that make you happy. Let me do that." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. This man, this impossibly kind man who wanted to buy her books and rub her frozen feet and kiss her like she was something precious. Maybe running away would have been the bigger risk after all. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Thomas still worked from dawn to dark, but now Sarah would bring him coffee in the barn, and they'd stand together in the morning cold, watching the sun rise. She'd gotten better at cooking, and Thomas would compliment every meal, even when it was obvious she'd over-seasoned or undercooked something. At night, they'd sit by the fire, Sarah reading the almanac aloud, while Thomas mended tools or carved pieces of wood. Sometimes their hands would brush, and Thomas would look at her with such longing that it made her breath catch. But he never pushed, never demanded. He let her set the pace. It was Sarah who finally asked if he'd like to kiss her goodnight one evening. Thomas had looked at her like she'd offered him the world. "You sure?" he'd asked, his voice rough. "I'm sure." He'd kissed her softly, reverently, his hands cupping her face. When he'd pulled away, his eyes had been dark with want. "Good night, Sarah," he'd whispered, pressing one more kiss to her forehead before retreating to his room. Sarah had touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of him. She'd wanted to call him back, wanted to ask him to stay, but fear had kept her silent. What if she wasn't ready? What if she disappointed him? So she'd gone to her room alone, climbing into the big bed and pulling the quilts up to her chin. But for the first time since arriving at the farm, she hadn't dreamed of Robert. Instead, she'd dreamed of Thomas, his gentle hands, his quiet voice, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. 2 weeks after her attempted flight, the first major storm of the season hit. Wind howled around the house, driving snow against the windows with such force that the glass rattled. Thomas spent hours bringing in firewood, checking the barn, making sure everything was secure. Sarah watched him from the window, her heart in her throat every time he disappeared into the white chaos. What if he got lost? What if he didn't come back? When he finally came inside, his face was red from the cold, and his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't undo the buttons on his coat. Sarah rushed to help him, her own hands trembling as she worked the frozen buttons free. "You're freezing," she said, pulling the coat off his shoulders. "Thomas, you're going to make yourself sick." Had to make sure everything was secure. His teeth were chattering. "Storm's going to last through the night, maybe longer." Sarah pulled him toward the fire, pushing him down into a chair. She knelt in front of him and pulled off his frozen boots, then his socks. His feet were ice cold, almost blue. "We need to warm you up," she said, her voice tight with worry. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your lips are blue, Thomas." She stood up and grabbed every blanket she could find, wrapping them around him. But he was still shaking, still so cold that she could feel it radiating off him even through the layers. Sarah made a decision. "Come with me," she said, taking his hand. "Sarah, I can't." "Don't argue. You're freezing, and I'm not going to let you catch pneumonia because you're too stubborn to accept help." She led him to her room and pushed him down onto the bed. Then, without giving herself time to second-guess, she climbed in beside him, pulling the heavy quilts over them both and pressing herself against his side. Thomas went rigid. "Sarah, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She wrapped her arm across his chest, sharing her warmth. "Just let me help you. Please." Slowly, carefully, Thomas's arm came around her, pulling her closer. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder and tried to ignore the rapid hammering of her heart. This was fine. This was just about getting him warm, nothing more. But Thomas was so cold that even through his shirt she could feel the chill of his skin. Without thinking, Sarah sat up and started unbuttoning his shirt. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked, his voice strained. "You need skin contact. It's the fastest way to warm up someone with hypothermia." She finished with the buttons and pushed the shirt off his shoulders, trying not to stare at the broad expanse of his chest. "I read it in a book once." "Sarah, don't argue with me, Thomas Brennan." She lay back down and pressed herself against his bare chest, her cheek against his skin. He was so cold. "Just let me do this." Thomas was trembling, but she didn't think it was entirely from the cold anymore. His heart was pounding beneath her ear, racing even faster than her own. His arm came around her again, this time pulling her impossibly closer. "You're going to be the death of me," he murmured into her hair. "Not if you freeze to death first." Despite everything, she felt him laugh. The vibration of it rumbled through his chest and into her. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on sharing her warmth with this man who'd become so important to her so quickly. Gradually, Thomas's trembling subsided. His skin grew warmer beneath her cheek, but neither of them moved to pull away. "Better?" Sarah asked softly. "Much." His hand was stroking up and down her back in a slow, soothing rhythm. "Thank you." "You scared me," she admitted, "when you were out there in the storm. I kept thinking about what would happen if you didn't come back." "I'll always come back to you," Thomas said, and there was such conviction in his voice that Sarah had to blink back tears. "Always, Sarah. I promise." She tilted her head up to look at him. His face was so close to hers, and in the dim light filtering through the window, his eyes were almost black. He was looking at her like he wanted to devour her, but also like she was something infinitely fragile that might shatter if he moved too quickly. "Thomas," she whispered, "I think I'd like you to kiss me again." "Just kiss?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah's pulse jumped. Was she ready for more? Could she do this? But looking into Thomas's eyes, seeing the want there tempered by patience and respect, she thought maybe she could. Maybe with this man, she could be brave. Maybe more than just kiss, she said, her voice barely audible. Thomas's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. Sarah, we don't have to rush this. I can wait. I will wait. For however long you need. I know. That's why I think I'm ready. She turned her head and kissed his palm. I trust you, Thomas. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust a man again, but I trust you. Something fierce and tender flashed across his face. If at any point you want to stop, you tell me. Promise me, Sarah. Promise you'll tell me if it's too much. I promise. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Sarah let herself sink into it. His hand slid into her hair, while the other stayed gentle on her face, and she pressed herself closer to him, wanting to eliminate any space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. You're sure? He asked one more time. I'm sure. And she was. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah was sure of something, sure of this man, this moment, this feeling of safety and desire tangled together. Outside, the storm howled. But inside, wrapped in Thomas's arms, Sarah finally felt like she'd come home. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days during which Sarah and Thomas were trapped inside together, with nothing to do but talk and read and learn each other. They played cards by lamplight and told stories about their childhoods. Thomas taught her how to carve wood, his large hands guiding hers, his breath warm against her neck, and at night, they'd curl up together in the big bed, sometimes just holding each other, sometimes exploring this new intimacy between them with gentle touches and whispered words. Thomas was patient and careful, always watching her face, always making sure she was comfortable. And Sarah found herself relaxing into his touch, into the pleasure of being close to him, into the joy of being wanted without being pressured. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun emerged to reveal a world transformed. Everything buried in pristine white, the sky a brilliant blue. Thomas dug them out, clearing a path to the barn and checking on the animals. Everything had survived the storm intact. That afternoon, as the sun was setting and painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Sarah stood at the window and watched Thomas walking back from the barn. He looked up and saw her there, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. She thought about the morning she'd tried to leave, about standing in this same spot, bag in hand, convinced that running was the only option. She'd been so sure that staying would lead to pain, that trusting Thomas would be a mistake. She'd been wrong. Thomas had given her something she'd thought she'd lost forever, the ability to hope, the courage to trust, the willingness to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be happy. The door opened, and Thomas stomped the snow off his boots. He looked up and found her watching him, and something soft and warm passed between them. What are you thinking about? He asked, moving toward her. Sarah smiled. About how I almost missed this. About how, if I'd left that morning, I never would have known what it was like to be really loved. Thomas pulled her into his arms, and Sarah went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. But they were true. Somehow, in the span of a few short weeks, she'd fallen completely in love with this quiet, gentle man who'd given her a second chance at life. Thomas's arms tightened around her. I love you too, Sarah, more than I thought I could love anyone again. He tilted her face up and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright. So, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice, does this mean you're going to stop trying to run away in the middle of winter? Sarah laughed. I think I can manage that. Good, because I meant what I said that morning. You're not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. Is that a command, Mr. Brennan? More like a request. He leaned down and whispered against her ear, a very sincere request from a man who can't imagine his life without you in it anymore. Sarah shivered, but not from cold. Well, when you put it that way, she kissed him again, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and love, and the bone-deep relief of finding a safe harbor after being lost at sea. Thomas responded in kind, his hands gentle but sure as they pulled her closer. Outside, the sun finished setting, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched out endlessly in all directions, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. But inside the little farmhouse, surrounded by warmth and love, Sarah Brennan had finally found her place in the world, and she wasn't going anywhere. Ever. Winter deepened its hold on the Dakota Territory as December arrived with brutal cold and frequent storms. But inside the farmhouse, a different kind of warmth had taken root. Sarah and Thomas had settled into their life together with a naturalness that surprised them both. Sarah had stopped sleeping in the bedroom alone 2 weeks after the big storm. It hadn't been a dramatic decision or a passionate moment that led to the change. It had simply felt ridiculous to keep pretending they wanted separate rooms when they spent every night curled up together anyway. Thomas had carried her few belongings into his room, and Sarah had arranged them alongside his, her brush next to his shaving kit, her nightgown hanging beside his spare shirt. Small intimacies that spoke of a life being built together. The nightmares still came sometimes, but when Sarah woke gasping and disoriented, Thomas was there. He'd pull her close and murmur reassurances until her breathing slowed and the terror faded. He never made her feel weak or broken for needing the comfort. He just held her, solid and steady, until she could sleep again. In return, Sarah learned to read the signs when Thomas was having a hard day, the way his jaw would tighten when he looked at the small room that had belonged to James, the distant look in his eyes on the anniversary of Mary's death. On those days, Sarah would simply be present, bringing him coffee, sitting beside him in comfortable silence, letting him know he wasn't alone. They were healing each other, slowly but surely. Two wounded souls learning to trust again. Christmas approached, and Sarah found herself looking forward to it for the first time in years. She'd managed to save a few dollars from the household money Thomas gave her, and she'd asked him to pick up yarn on his next trip to town. She was determined to knit him a scarf, even though her attempts so far had been less than successful. "What are you working on?" Thomas asked one evening, eyeing the lumpy mass of yarn in her lap. "It's supposed to be a scarf," Sarah admitted, holding it up. It was uneven and full of dropped stitches. "I'm not very good at this." Thomas took it from her, examining it with exaggerated seriousness. "I think it's perfect." "You're a terrible liar." "I'm completely serious. This is clearly the work of a master craftswoman." He wrapped the sorry-looking scarf around his neck and struck a pose. "How do I look?" Sarah laughed so hard she had tears in her eyes. Thomas was grinning at her, clearly pleased with himself for making her laugh. These moments of levity had become more frequent between them. The easy joy of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "You look ridiculous," Sarah managed. "Ridiculously handsome, you mean?" He sat down beside her and pulled her into his lap, still wearing the terrible scarf. "I'm never taking it off." "Thomas, it's awful. Let me start over." "Not a chance. This scarf was made with love by my beautiful wife. That makes it priceless." He nuzzled against her neck, his breath warm against her skin. "Besides, I like that it's imperfect. Means it's real." Sarah turned in his arms to look at him. "When did you become such a romantic?" "The moment a stubborn woman tried to walk 7 miles in a blizzard rather than stay married to me." His hand cupped her face, his thumb stroking across her cheek. "She scared 10 years off my life that morning, but she also gave me a reason to keep living." "Thomas!" He kissed her, cutting off whatever she'd been about to say. The kiss started gentle but quickly deepened, Thomas's hands sliding into her hair while Sarah clutched at his shoulders. The yarn and needles fell forgotten to the floor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas's eyes were dark with want. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I think we should go to bed." It wasn't a question, but Sarah heard the question beneath it anyway. Was she ready? Did she want this? The answer was yes. She wanted him, wanted this, wanted to be close to him in every way possible. "I think that's an excellent idea," she whispered. Thomas stood up, still holding her in his arms, and carried her to their bedroom. He set her down gently on the bed, and then just looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing this moment. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah woke to find Thomas already up, stoking the fire and making coffee. She wrapped herself in a quilt and padded out to join him, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Merry Christmas," she murmured. Thomas turned and pulled her into his arms. "Merry Christmas, wife." They had a simple breakfast, and then Thomas disappeared into the barn for a few minutes. When he came back, he was carrying a wooden box. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Your Christmas present." He set it down on the table in front of her. "Open it." Sarah lifted the lid and gasped. Inside were books, at least a dozen of them. Poetry, novels, even a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "Thomas, this must have cost—" "It doesn't matter what it cost." He sat down beside her. "You said you loved to read, and I wanted you to have something that made you happy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." He pulled out the journal. "This one is for you to write in. Your own thoughts or stories or whatever you want. I thought maybe you'd like having a place to put down your words." Sarah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just threw her arms around Thomas's neck and held on tight. No one had ever given her a gift like this, something that showed they'd really listened, really cared about what mattered to her. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome." He pulled back just enough to wipe away her tears. "Now, I believe I have a scarf to wear." Sarah laughed through her tears and retrieved the lumpy scarf she'd made. Thomas wrapped it around his neck with great ceremony, looking absurdly pleased with himself. They spent the rest of the day reading together by the fire, Thomas's arm around Sarah's shoulders while she leaned against him. It was peaceful and perfect, and everything Sarah had never dared to hope Christmas could be. As the sun set and the room grew dim, Thomas stirred beside her. "Sarah," he said softly, "I want to tell you something." She looked up at him, noting the seriousness in his expression. "What is it?" "When Mary and James died, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd just go through the motions until it was my time to join them." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "But you gave me a reason to start living again. Really living. Not just surviving." "Thomas, let me finish." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I know our marriage started as an arrangement. I know you answered that advertisement out of necessity, not love. But somewhere along the way, this became real for me. You became real for me. And I need you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful that you stayed. Grateful that you gave us a chance." Sarah's throat was tight with emotion. "I'm grateful too. You saved me, Thomas. Not just from poverty or from being alone, but from believing that I wasn't worthy of being loved. You showed me that I deserve kindness and respect and all the things I'd stopped believing I could have. You've always deserved those things, Sarah, always." She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, love and gratitude and bone-deep contentment. When they broke apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Best Christmas I've had in years," he murmured. "Me too." They sat like that as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire. Outside, the prairie was frozen and harsh. But inside, Sarah and Thomas had created something warm and precious. A home, a family, a love that would weather any storm. The new year arrived with more snow and bitter cold, but Sarah barely noticed. She was too busy being happy, too caught up in the joy of her new life. She'd started writing in the journal Thomas had given her, filling page after page with her thoughts and feelings, and the story of how she'd found love in the most unlikely place. Thomas continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. He'd carved her a beautiful wooden shelf for her books. He'd surprised her with a new dress he'd commissioned from the seamstress in town, deep blue fabric that brought out her eyes. He'd even learned to braid her hair in the mornings, his large fingers surprisingly deft. In return, Sarah had mastered the art of cooking, or at least become competent enough that dinner wasn't a gamble anymore. She'd also started helping Thomas with some of the lighter farm work, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, tending the small indoor garden they'd started for winter greens. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, falling into an easy partnership that felt as natural as breathing. One evening in late January, Sarah was darning socks by lamplight when Thomas came in from checking the barn. He stomped the snow off his boots and hung up his coat, the terrible scarf still wrapped around his neck, despite the fact that Sarah had offered multiple times to make him a better one. "There's something I want to show you," he said, holding out his hand. Sarah set down her mending and took his hand, letting him lead her to the small room that had belonged to James. She hadn't been inside since arriving at the farm. It felt too private, too sacred. But now Thomas opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The room looked different. The bed had been made up with fresh linens, the toys had been carefully arranged on shelves, and on the wall hung a new photograph. Sarah and Thomas together, taken during a rare trip to town the week before. "I've been thinking," Thomas said quietly, standing behind her. "This room has been a shrine for too long. James wouldn't want that. He'd want it to be lived in, to be loved." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe, if you want, we could turn this into a different kind of room. A room for guests, or a sewing room for you, or—" He paused. "Or maybe someday, a nursery." Sarah turned to face him, confused. "But Thomas, I told you I can't have children." "I know, but that doesn't mean we can't have a family." His hands came up to frame her face. "There are orphans in town, Sarah. Children who need homes and parents who'll love them. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I wanted to know, would you want that? Would you want to maybe give a child the kind of home we're building here?" Sarah could barely breathe. "You'd want to adopt?" "I'd want to give a child who has nothing the same second chance we gave each other." His eyes were bright with emotion. "We could give some kid a home, Sarah. A real home with love and stability and all the things they might not have now. What do you think?" What did she think? She thought her heart might burst. She thought she'd somehow found the most wonderful man in existence. She thought she wanted nothing more than to raise a child with this gentle, patient, loving man who kept surprising her with his enormous heart. "I think," she said, her voice shaking, "that sounds perfect." Thomas's smile was brilliant. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, then pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll wait until spring," he said. "Give ourselves time to prepare. But Sarah, we're going to give some kid the best life we can. I promise you that. I know we will, because you're going to be an amazing father, and you're going to be an amazing mother." They stood in the small room, surrounded by the memories of the boy who'd lived here before and made promises for the future. Promises about the family they'd build together, the love they'd share, the life they'd create. Sarah thought about that cold morning when she'd tried to leave, convinced that staying was impossible. She'd been so certain that she knew what was best, so sure that running was the only option. She'd been so very wrong, because staying had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life that was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. She'd found love in the frozen Dakota Territory, in the arms of a farmer who'd been just as broken as she was. And together, they'd healed each other, built something strong and real and lasting. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Thomas said, "more than I ever thought possible." And as they stood there in the lamplight, planning their future and dreaming of the family they'd create, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd tried to run away at dawn, but Thomas had stopped her with 6 simple words: "You're not going anywhere." And thank God he had, because the life she'd tried to run from had turned out to be exactly the life she'd been searching for all along. Home, safety, love. With Thomas Brennan, she'd found all 3, and she was never going to let them go. Spring came slowly to the Dakota Territory, melting the snow inch by inch and revealing the brown earth beneath. The prairie began to show hints of green, and the first wildflowers pushed their way through the frost-hardened ground. Sarah stood at the window, watching the world come back to life, and marveled at how much had changed since that winter morning when she'd tried to leave. Thomas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how wrong I was," Sarah said softly. "About everything. About you. About this place. About what I deserved. And what do you think now?" She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face. "I think I'm the luckiest woman alive. I think I found something here that I didn't even know I was looking for. And I think," her voice broke slightly, "I think I'm finally home." Thomas's eyes were bright with emotion. "You are home, Sarah. This is your home. I'm your home. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that. You already have," she whispered. "You already have." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When he pulled away, he was smiling. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "We've got a room to prepare and plans to make. We're going to town next week to talk to the orphanage." "Next week?" Sarah felt a flutter of excitement and nerves. "Next week. No point in waiting when we both know what we want. No point in waiting indeed." Sarah had spent too much of her life waiting. Waiting for things to get better, waiting for someone to save her, waiting for permission to be happy. But Thomas had taught her that happiness wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built day by day, moment by moment, with someone who loved you enough to be patient while you learned to trust again. As they walked hand in hand to the small room that would soon become a nursery, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to the Dakota Territory. Gratitude for a matrimonial advertisement that had seemed like a last resort but had turned out to be salvation. Gratitude for Thomas Brennan, the quiet farmer who'd looked at a broken woman and seen someone worth loving. She'd tried to run away at dawn, convinced that leaving was the only choice, but Thomas had whispered 6 words that changed everything. "You're not going anywhere." And he'd been right. She wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. She was home, finally, beautifully, completely home. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in early May, Sarah and Thomas stood in the office of the Millbrook Orphanage. The matron, Mrs. Patterson, was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, but her eyes were kind as she looked at the couple standing before her. "We've had several families inquire about adoption," Mrs. Patterson said, folding her hands on the desk, "but most of them want infants. They want babies they can mold from the beginning." She paused, studying Sarah and Thomas carefully. "You said you'd be willing to take an older child." "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said. "We know older children need homes just as much as babies do. Maybe more, since folks tend to overlook them." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "That's very true, Mr. Brennan. We have several children who've been with us for years. Good children, but they've been passed over time and again because they're not infants." Sarah felt her heart clench. She knew what it was like to be overlooked, to be considered less worthy because you didn't fit someone's ideal. "Could we meet them?" she asked softly. "Of course." Mrs. Patterson stood up. "Follow me." She led them through the building to a large room where several children of various ages were playing. Some were reading, others were working on chores, and a few were playing a game with wooden blocks. Sarah's eyes were immediately drawn to a girl sitting alone in the corner, mending a shirt with careful, precise stitches. She looked to be about 9 or 10, with dark hair pulled back in a severe braid and serious brown eyes. While the other children chattered and played, this girl worked in silence, her face solemn. "That's Emma," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, following Sarah's gaze. "She's been with us for 3 years. Her parents died of cholera. She's a good girl, quiet, hard-working, never any trouble. But she's also nearly 10 years old, which makes her difficult to place." Sarah watched as Emma finished her stitching and carefully folded the shirt, adding it to a neat pile beside her. There was something achingly familiar about the girl's solemnity, about the way she seemed to be trying to make herself small and unnoticeable. "Can we speak with her?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Patterson nodded and called Emma over. The girl approached slowly, her eyes downcast, her hands clasped in front of her. "Emma, these are Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. They're interested in adoption and would like to talk with you." Emma's eyes flicked up briefly, meeting Sarah's before looking down again. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly. Thomas crouched down, so he was at the girl's eye level. "Hello, Emma. My name is Thomas, and this is my wife, Sarah. We have a farm about 7 miles from here. We're looking to add to our family, and we thought maybe you'd like to come visit, see if you'd be interested in living with us." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You want me? But I'm—" She stopped, biting her lip. "You're what?" Sarah asked gently. "I'm almost 10. Most folks want babies." The words came out matter-of-factly, as if Emma had heard this so many times she'd accepted it as truth. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She knelt down beside Thomas. "We don't want a baby, Emma. We want someone who can be part of our family. Someone who can help on the farm, who can learn and grow with us. And from what Mrs. Patterson says, you're exactly the kind of person we're looking for." Emma looked between Sarah and Thomas, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Why? It was such a simple question, but Sarah heard the weight behind it. Why would anyone want her? Why would anyone choose her when there were younger, cuter, more appealing children available? "Because," Thomas said quietly, "my wife and I know what it's like to feel unwanted, to feel like you don't belong anywhere, and we don't want anyone else to feel that way if we can help it." Something shifted in Emma's face. Her chin trembled slightly, and she blinked rapidly. "Would you like to come visit our farm?" Sarah asked. "Just for the day, so you can see where you might be living. No pressure, no commitment, just a chance to get to know us." Emma nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am, I'd like that." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Wonderful. I'll prepare the paperwork for a day visit. You can pick Emma up this Saturday morning if that suits you." As they left the orphanage, Sarah felt Thomas's hand slip into hers. "She reminds me of you," he said softly. "That first day you arrived, so determined to be brave, so afraid to hope." Sarah squeezed his hand. "She reminds me of me too. That's why I think we're meant to help her." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Emma was waiting on the front steps of the orphanage, wearing a clean but faded dress, her hair neatly braided. She clutched a small cloth bag, probably containing everything she owned in the world. The wagon ride to the farm was quiet. Emma sat between Sarah and Thomas, her eyes wide as she took in the endless prairie, the distant mountains, the vast blue sky overhead. "Have you ever been on a farm before?" Sarah asked. "No, Mum. I lived in town before my parents died." "Well, we'll show you everything. The chickens, the vegetable garden, the barn. Do you like animals?" Emma's face lit up slightly. "I've never really been around them much, but I think I'd like to learn." When they arrived at the farmhouse, Emma stood in the yard for a long moment, just looking at everything. Sarah watched her, remembering her own first day here, the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that this might be a place where she could belong. "Would you like to see inside?" Thomas asked. Emma nodded, and they gave her a tour of the small house. Sarah showed her the kitchen, explaining how the stove worked. Thomas showed her the room that had been James's, now freshly painted and ready for a new occupant. "This would be your room," Sarah said softly, "if you decided you wanted to stay." Emma walked around the small space, touching the bed frame, the dresser, the window that looked out over the prairie. "My own room," she whispered. "Your own room," Thomas confirmed, "with your own bed and your own space. We'd never make you share or feel like you were intruding." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she quickly brushed them away. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to cry." "It's all right to cry," Sarah said gently, kneeling beside her. "Sometimes tears are the only way to express what we're feeling." Emma looked at her with those serious brown eyes. "At the orphanage, crying makes you weak. The other children tease you if they see you cry." Sarah's heart broke a little. "Well, in this house, crying doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And we're all human here." They spent the rest of the morning showing Emma the farm. She was fascinated by the chickens, giggling when one pecked at her shoe. Thomas lifted her up so she could see into the horse stalls, and Emma's face glowed with wonder as she stroked the soft muzzle of Thomas's mare. For lunch, Sarah had prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken. They ate outside on a blanket, and Sarah was pleased to see Emma eating with enthusiasm, unlike at the orphanage table, where she'd probably learned to eat quickly and without enjoyment, always worried someone might take her food. "Emma," Thomas said as they were finishing the meal, "I want to be honest with you about something." Emma's face immediately closed off, and Sarah recognized the defensive posture. The girl was expecting rejection. "Before my wife came here, I was married to someone else. Her name was Mary, and we had a son named James. They both died of fever 2 years ago." Thomas's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the emotion underneath. "I want you to know that if you come to live with us, we're not trying to replace them. James will always be my son, and Mary will always be my first wife. But that doesn't mean there isn't room in our hearts for you." Emma stared at him, processing this information. "You had a family before?" "I did, and I lost them. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through." Thomas looked at Sarah. "But then Sarah came into my life, and she showed me that it was possible to love again, that opening your heart after loss doesn't dishonor the people you've lost. It honors them by proving that the love they gave you was strong enough to help you love again." "My parents died 3 years ago," Emma said quietly. "I watched them get sick. I watched them die. And afterward, everyone treated me like I was broken, like I was something to be pitied." "You're not broken," Sarah said firmly. "You're a survivor, and that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." Emma looked between Sarah and Thomas, and for the first time there was real hope in her eyes. Not the cautious, tentative hope from before, but something brighter and stronger. "If I came to live here," she said slowly, "would I have to call you mother and father?" Sarah and Thomas exchanged a glance. "You can call us whatever feels right to you," Sarah said. "If you want to call us mother and father, that's wonderful. If you want to call us Sarah and Thomas, that's fine too. We won't force you to pretend to feel something you don't feel." Some of the children at the orphanage got adopted. Emma continued. They came back to visit once, and they said their new parents made them call them mother and father right away, made them act like they'd been family forever, but they weren't happy. You could tell. Thomas nodded. We won't do that to you, Emma. Family isn't something you can force. It's something that grows over time, when people care for each other and support each other. We want you to be part of our family, but we want you to do it at your own pace, in your own way. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, could I try it? Living here, I mean. Not just for a day, but really try it. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. We would love that. We would love that more than anything. Mrs. Patterson says there's a trial period, Emma said, showing a maturity beyond her years. Where I live with you for a few months, and if it doesn't work out, I go back to the orphanage. Is that what you'd want to do? Yes, Thomas said. Not because we think it won't work out, but because we want you to have the freedom to change your mind if you need to. We want you to choose to be here, Emma, not feel trapped here. Emma nodded slowly, then looked around at the farm, the house, the endless sky. I think I'd like to try, she said softly. I think I'd like to have a home again. Sarah couldn't help it. She pulled Emma into a hug, careful to be gentle, giving the girl room to pull away if she wanted. But Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she wrapped her thin arms around Sarah's waist and held on tight. Welcome home, Emma, Sarah whispered. The transition wasn't without challenges. Emma moved into the farmhouse 2 weeks later, bringing her small bag of belongings and a fierce determination to prove herself useful. She threw herself into chores with an intensity that worried Sarah, scrubbing floors until her hands were red, working in the garden until she was exhausted, apologizing profusely for even the smallest mistakes. Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to work yourself to exhaustion, Sarah said one evening, finding the girl still weeding the vegetable garden long after dinner. I want to earn my keep, Emma said, not looking up. I don't want you to regret taking me in. Sarah knelt beside her in the dirt. Emma, look at me. The girl finally looked up, and Sarah saw the fear in her eyes. The fear that if she wasn't useful enough, if she didn't work hard enough, she'd be sent back. You are not here because of what you can do for us, Sarah said firmly. You are here because we want you here, because we care about you. Yes, we appreciate your help with chores, but your value as a person doesn't depend on how clean the floors are or how many weeds you pull. At the orphanage, this isn't the orphanage. This is your home, and in your home you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to play. You are allowed to make mistakes without fearing punishment. Emma's chin trembled. I don't know how to do that. I don't remember how to just be a child. Sarah's heart ached. This girl had been forced to grow up too fast, had learned to survive by being useful, by being invisible, by never causing trouble. Then we'll teach you, Sarah said softly, one day at a time, just like Thomas taught me. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Thomas worked gently to help Emma relax into her new life. Thomas taught her to ride one of the horses, patient as she overcame her initial fear. Sarah taught her to bake, laughing together when their first attempt at bread came out hard as a rock. They read together in the evenings. Emma curled up between them on the sofa, and slowly the girl began to soften. The nightmares started about a month after Emma arrived. Sarah woke one night to the sound of crying and found Emma in her room, curled up in a ball, shaking with sobs. Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? I dreamed about my parents, Emma gasped out between sobs. I dreamed about watching them die, and I couldn't help them, and I couldn't save them. Sarah climbed into bed beside Emma and pulled the girl into her arms. It's all right. I've got you. You're safe. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep. When he saw Sarah holding Emma, he moved to the other side of the bed, and together they surrounded the sobbing child with warmth and comfort. I have nightmares too, Sarah said quietly, stroking Emma's hair, about things that happened before I came here. And every time I wake up scared, Thomas is there, just like we're here for you now. Does it ever stop? Emma asked, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. Does it ever stop hurting? The hurt doesn't go away completely, Thomas said honestly, but it gets easier to bear, especially when you have people who love you helping carry the weight. Do you? Emma pulled back to look at them. Do you love me? Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Oh, Emma. Yes, we love you. But how? I've only been here a month. How can you love me already when you barely know me? Because love isn't just about time, Thomas said. It's about choice. And we choose to love you, Emma. Every day, we choose you." Emma burst into fresh tears, but this time they seemed cleansing rather than despairing. She clung to Sarah and Thomas, and they held her until she cried herself to sleep, exhausted from emotion. As Sarah carefully tucked the blanket around Emma's sleeping form, Thomas pulled her close. "She's going to be all right," he whispered. "I know," Sarah whispered back, "because she has what she needs. A family who loves her, flaws and all." They left Emma's door cracked open and returned to their own room. As Sarah snuggled against Thomas's chest, she marveled at how much had changed. A year ago, she'd been a broken woman trying to run away in a blizzard, convinced she had nothing to offer anyone. Now she was helping heal another broken soul, offering Emma the same unconditional love that Thomas had offered her. The cycle of healing continued. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long golden days and warm nights. Emma bloomed like one of the wildflowers that dotted the prairie. She laughed more often now, her serious face lighting up with genuine joy. She'd made friends with some of the children in town, and Sarah and Thomas would smile at each other when they heard her giggling with them after church on Sundays. One evening, as they were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Emma spoke up. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but determined, "about what I want to call you." Sarah and Thomas exchanged a glance but said nothing, letting Emma work through her thoughts. "When my parents were alive, I called them Mama and Papa, and I thought that if I ever called anyone else that, it would mean I was forgetting them." Emma paused, picking at a thread on her dress. "But I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think loving new people means forgetting old people." "That's very wise," Thomas said softly. "So I was thinking maybe I could call you Ma and Pa. Not Mama and Papa, because those names belong to my first parents, but Ma and Pa, which would be just for you." Sarah had to swallow hard past the lump in her throat. "Emma, we would be honored." Emma looked between them, a shy smile on her face. "Then, is it all right if I start now?" "Ma, Pa, it's more than all right," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. He held out his arms, and Emma flew into them, hugging him tight. Sarah joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, and they stayed like that as the sun set and the first stars began to appear. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Thomas sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. "We did it," Sarah said softly. "We gave her a home." "We gave each other a home," Thomas corrected. "All three of us. We built this together." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that morning, when you stopped me from leaving?" "Every day." His arm tightened around her. "I think about what I might have lost if I hadn't woken up in time." "I'm so glad you woke up." "Me too." He turned to kiss her forehead. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the prairie at night, crickets chirping, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustle of wind through grass. "Thomas," Sarah said eventually, "I'm happy. Truly, deeply happy. I didn't think that was possible for me, but you made it possible." "We made it possible," he corrected again. "You chose to stay, Sarah. You chose to trust me, to let me in, to build this life with me. I couldn't have done any of it without you. And now we're doing it for Emma. And doing a damn fine job of it, if I do say so myself." He grinned at her. "Who knew a broke Philadelphia merchant's daughter and a widowed Dakota farmer would make such good parents?" Sarah laughed. "Certainly not me. A year ago, I couldn't even imagine this life. And now, I can't imagine anything else." "Good." He pulled her closer. "Because you're stuck with us, Sarah Brennan. Me and Emma and this farm and this life. You're not going anywhere." "I know." Sarah smiled up at him, her heart full. "And I wouldn't want to, even if I could." As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the pain and loss that had driven her to answer a matrimonial advertisement, about the terror she'd felt arriving in a strange place to marry a stranger, about the morning she'd tried to run, and the man who'd stopped her with 6 simple words: "You're not going anywhere." Those words had saved her life. They'd given her hope when she had none, love when she thought she was unlovable, a future when she'd believed she had nothing left. And now she was passing that gift on to Emma, showing another lost soul that it was possible to heal, possible to trust, possible to love again after loss. The circle was complete. Sarah Brennan was finally, truly home, not just in this house on the Dakota prairie, but in herself, whole and healed and ready to embrace whatever came next. She wasn't running anymore. She never would again.